What happens when the world feels like it's moving in a direction you didn't choose and one that you can't control? What happens when every headline feels heavier than the last and your brain won't stop trying to process all of it? There's a real challenge happening out there, and it's a matter of what neurodiversity you have and how you make sense of it. Welcome back to ASD is Ability. I'm Joan Torrance, and this podcast is about understanding how neurodivergent minds, being autism spectrum disorder, ADHD, and beyond, experience the world, and how we can turn that into our own strength. Today's episode is different. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge something important. I know from looking at the stats of people listening to the podcast right now that some of you are in the middle of a conflict. I know this podcast has been having listeners from Israel, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and across the Middle East. If that's you, I want you to know that you are in my thoughts. And I want to approach this episode with respect, because today's conversations has two sides. One is for those of you directly affected, and the other one is for those watching from distance, trying to process and understand what's happening. And for both groups, especially if you are neurodivergent, this can be overwhelming in a very specific way. So today we are going to explore something deeper than the news itself. We are going to explore how we perceive reality, how our brains interpret uncertainty, and how we can still move forward, even if there's an unstable situation around us. At the time of this recording, there is a war happening in the Middle East, and like any major conflict, it brings layers of impact. There's the real human suffering, the people directly affected, and there is the secondary wave, the rest of us from distance absorbing it through the news, conversations, predictions, and a degree of fear. If you live in the UK, like I do, you will hear constant discussions about economic impact, energy prices, job uncertainty, and market instability. And when you consume enough of that, something subtle happens. Your brain starts building a version of reality, not just based on facts, based on emphasis. And this is where neurodiversity matters. Because if you have ASD, your brain doesn't just hear information. It analyzes deeply, connects patterns, and projects forwards. Very often, if projects towards the worst case scenario might be possible, we tend to start considering. Not because you are negative, because the brain is trying to prepare us. Let me share something that shifted my perspective. A few days ago, I was at the airport in the UK and I was leaving for a flight to Spain. It was a very early flight, around 4:30 in the morning. My flight was just before 6 a.m. There was no school holidays and no obvious reason for crowds. And yet, the airport was full. People boarding flights, some families going on holidays, plenty of people moving around. And at that moment, that early time of the day, because I have listened to the news the week about the conflict, I would have expected something different. something quieter, slower. And in reality, in that moment, everything looked absolutely normal. And that contrast made me realize something important. The world doesn't only have one point of view. It depends on where you are standing. Now let's talk about this through the ASD lens. Because uncertainty hits differently when you are neurodivergent. We often prefer structure, rely on predictable outcomes, and feel safer when we know what's going to happen. So when something global happens, something we cannot control, it creates two layers of difficulty. First, we feel disorientated. We don't know where things are going. And second, lack of control, because we cannot influence the outcome. And that combination can be deeply unsettling. Our brains keep asking, what does this mean for the future? What should I do? How bad could it get? And when there are no clear answers, our brain overloads. And you might consider, if you don't have a neurodiversity, that situations like that also happen to you. And you are right. The stimulus we receive is the same. The worries that we might have are still there. And it's the different type of neurodiversity that tell us how we're going to approach from one way or another. And here is the idea that helped me reframe this. Think of your life as a painting. Ideally, you would want a blank canvas, something clean, predictable, under your control. Real life doesn't always give you that. Sometimes you're handed a canvas that's already been started, messy and finished, not quite what you choose. And the instinct, especially with neurodiversities like ASD, is to resist that, to wish for the blank canvas. What if the real skill is learning to paint anyway? To adapt to what's already there? Because the truth is, if you don't control the canvas, can you at least control what you add to it? Let's look at this approach of looking to control better what's available to us. So how do we actually apply this? There are three ways that we can take. First, separate awareness from immersion. One thing is being informed of what's happening around us, and a very different one is being drowned in a sea of information. Because our brain doesn't need constant updates to be prepared. And we need space to process and be able to analyze what we can do. Second, define your circle of control. You can ask yourself, what can I actually influence today? Your actions, your routine, your mindset, that's what you can control. And that's what's going to give you the most of the outcome, not information that is around you. That shift, just that one alone, reduces a lot of overload. And third, build what I would call your 51%. I describe myself as a cautiously optimistic. So yes, I'm optimistic and I'm cautious because I don't want to be blindly positive and thinking everything is going to be good, full stop. I'm aware of the reality. I'm still aiming for a positive outcome. And even if the reality might be 49% negative, we can still look at the 51% possibility of being positive, and that alone is the majority. Doesn't mean ignoring reality, it means balancing it. Because your brain will naturally weight the negative more heavily. So you have to actively rebalance it. And that applies very well to the situation we have right now. We have the news, we have all the source of information that tend to be very negative. They tend to say, prepare for the worst case scenario, prepare for things to be much worse. And we don't know how it's going to be. We can choose how we want to think, and we can think about the situation and think how we can prepare. And that perspective matters because it reminds us that reality is not just one thing. It's many things happening at once. And the key message today is this: be aware of the reality around you. Don't let it fully define your internal world. Understand your canvas. Work with it, and remember, even if there is uncertainty, you are still painting your life every single day. Thank you for listening to this episode of ASD is Ability. If what we discussed resonated with you, especially if you are feeling overwhelmed by the world lately, share it with someone who might benefit from that perspective. In the next episode, we'll continue exploring how neurodiversity and our perception of the world around us both shapes us and also present a challenge to move forward. Until then, I wish that you are well, safe, and look forward to talking to you then. Take care.